start that. A little late, but better late than never. So, okay.
Um, I just wanted to add, we also have Tulsi. She is a new addition to the RDC team as well. She's our community engagement coordinator. So if you wanted to say hello to the people, Tulsi, feel free to do so.
Won't take up too much time because I know Daniela has lots for us to do today. But it's a pleasure to meet everyone. My name is Lucy, and I am the community engagement coordinator. So a lot of my work will center around outreach to new organizations and building partnerships. So my background is very much so within the healthcare field, so directly interacting with disabled folks and helping to find meaningful accommodations for them and just getting them into different activities that make every day, a new adventure for them.
Awesome. Thanks so much for sharing, Tulsi. And I'm just thinking, because we're quite a small group and not everybody knows each other, I think it would be great to just do some brief introductions as well. So maybe Rita, we could start with you and then go to Julia and Laura. Oh, you're mute.
Sorry, I couldn't find my little unmute button. Hi, everyone. I'm Rita Keeler. I'm actually in Vancouver, and I manage the HR function at the Rick Hansen Foundation. And I'm super happy to be here. I was part of the COP last year and have found the learnings a good journey for me. Lots to learn and lots of unknowns, and I just appreciate having the support and space to do so.
So, thank you, Rita. Go ahead, Julia.
Hi, everybody. I'm Julia Hepner, and I'm the Executive Director of Peer Connections Manitoba. So we're a provincial organization. Our head office is in Winnipeg, which is where I am right now. And so we are a mental health organization. And so everybody that we employ, it's in our bylaws, everybody that works for us, even our board of directors or admin assistant, everybody has to have a declared either mental health concern or have gone through a walk with addictions or be a family member. And so I identify as a family member and have gone through my own journey of recovery and trying to contextualize what that means for me and my family. And so, we come at disability differently. It's an interesting sort of cross section of how do we look at disability through the eyes of mental health. And so what does accommodation look like? How do our policies need to change? So this has been a really invaluable group for me to attend. And I hope that in the future, more people who have mental health organizations will really invest in this work and see it as work for them and not just sort of as separate.
Right. Thank you so much, Julia. And Laura.
So I am the proverbial disturber, and trying to get my head around how organizationally we fit into all of this. I am the executive director of the Canadian Down Syndrome Society, and our address is now in Ontario, was previously in Alberta, and we're all remote. It's very digital, and we have a very small staff of white women. And, part of the challenge of any advocacy type organization is, bringing the voice of individuals with watch experience into the whole thing. And, it's interesting with Down syndrome where, are we talking about all intellectual disabilities or are we talking about Down syndrome? And what is the model, almost global model of the decisions are made without the people with Down syndrome in the room? You may have seen some very recent marketing. It was World Down Syndrome Day, and it's about making decisions for people without letting them speak for people. But for us, this will require a significant change in our entire policy, in our entire workings, to include people with adults with lived experience where some of those adults require the accommodation of a support person. And the question then becomes, are you talking to the support person or are you talking to the person whose voice? How do you separate the voices? And the other thing that is a great puzzle to us is that, if we look at some of the demographics of our audience, and certainly the demographics of representation of people with Down syndrome in the media, it seems to be a white disease. And it's, first of all, it's not a disease, and second of all, it affects everybody across the spectrum. But for the most part, increasing diversity in our imaging, et cetera, has proven to be really difficult, because how do we get people to do that without being tokenistic, oh, you're a Black person, I'm so happy, I want to take your picture, so that we can use that. So there's different kinds of challenges, I think, when it's a small team, when we're part of a cog of a whole international representation, and what that looks like now and what it might look like in years to come, because we never used to speak much about adult issues and Down syndrome because people had a short life expectancy, and now that has more than doubled in a generation. There's all kinds of adult things that are on the table that we never talked about before: employment, independence, retirement, financial planning. What if my parents die first? All of that. And some people with intellectual disability don't have the capacity to participate in some of that decision making. So there's a little bit of a conflict. And
Thank you, Laura.
yeah,
It's really great to hear more about all the reflections you're having, and important to hear all the challenges that you're facing, because we do have quite a bit to cover today.
okay,
I think we're gonna
just shut me up.
we're gonna need to move on.
Thank you.
But I really appreciate everything you've shared, and just kind of reiterating the importance of people who are affected being involved in decision making. And then also, what you highlighted about how complex that can be, right? So being able to navigate the complexities of that. And then obviously media and communication, how do we do that in an inclusive way that's not tokenistic? So yeah, so really appreciate your reflections and your sharing. Thank you. Oh, so let's dive in we'll start with our review, just very briefly touching on what we covered in the COP, because it was a while back. Just kind of remind us what we've already done before we dive into the new topics for today. So we talked about structural oppression, and we had a really powerful clip by Ben Akuoko, who was talking about the analogy of the house, right? So we can't just kind of sweep the floors, because structural oppression means that it's actually in the walls. And that's how endemic it is. And that's the approach we need to take when we're looking at how do we create more inclusion in our organizations. We looked at specific policies around holidays, and how do we make sure that those policies are including everybody in our organization, and specifically, how do we tailor that to be more inclusive for Indigenous, Black, and racialized people with disabilities. Then we looked at how do we create an inclusive job posting, what's the difference between accessibility and accommodations, and then, like you were saying, Laura, what is tokenism, and how do we make sure that we're doing things in a way that's really meaningful and not tokenistic. And we also looked at the different types of power in organizations, and becoming more aware of different power dynamics, and how do we factor that into the work that we're doing. So this is just a brief recap of what we did, what we already covered in the COP. And today we're going to dive deeper into two other topics. So the first one that we're going to look at is about flexible working arrangements. So what are the benefits of having flexible working arrangements? One of the things that's really important is being able to support the recruitment and retention of a diverse workforce. And this is because when we have working arrangements that are flexible, it leads to more accessibility in terms of geography, right? So people have more choice, like where do I live? I don't need to worry about living really close to my work because I don't necessarily need to come into my work. So that reduces transportation costs and housing costs. And so then workplaces become more accessible for those reasons. It also increases employee well-being and productivity when you're able to have that flexibility and we don't have working conditions that are so rigid for people. And this leads to better retention, which decreases the cost to organizations. There's less turnover, there's reduced absenteeism. So it's got benefits on all sides for the employees and their well-being, as well as organizations and their bottom line. So, one of the things that flexible working arrangements does, it accommodates a more flexible schedule for diverse needs. So with people with chronic illnesses and disabilities, if we don't do this, if we don't create that kind of flexibility, it creates barriers. If we're saying people have to be at work at these times on these days, and maybe this isn't possible, or this is really stressful or limiting for people with disabilities and chronic illnesses, then we're putting up barriers for people to be able to actually do this work, and not only do the work, but do the work in a way where people can be successful and where they can be fulfilled. And then the other part is family needs. So if people have young children, that can be really tricky. So flexible working arrangements can be really helpful with that. Or if people are caregivers to elderly relatives or other family, this is really important to be able to provide this kind of flexibility. And there's some interesting statistics on this from the Becker-Friedman Institute for Economics. So there was actually 27% of increased likelihood of promotion for ethnic minorities working flexibly. So that kind of flexibility, had such a big impact in people's ability to do their work successfully and therefore be promoted in those roles. And parents with at least one child under 6 are 5% more productive when working from home. Because it gives the opportunity to be able to care for the child and do the work at the same time. So this is an interesting study that was done by the Future of Work Consortium. It was the second survey that they did in April and May of 2023. Just want to see. So there were about 2,642 Canadians that participated in the survey. And it's really interesting because you can see how things, especially like job satisfaction, productivity, and mental health, there's a huge effect of being able to work from home there. The positive effect of that is really, really big. And then even things like commitment to your employer and work safety, that's pretty significant as well. And then, with the team building and socializing with coworkers, that starts to go a little bit more to the other side, because obviously it's easier when you're in person with people to build that sense of connection and to have that socialization time with coworkers. So we need to be more intentional about building those things in when we're working remotely. But there's so many benefits as we can see here. And there are different types of flexible working arrangements that we can have. Some of them you may be really familiar with, others not so much. So flex time, so people being able to have the freedom to start and end at different times. And maybe, there's an agreement that, okay, as long as you have this overlap with the organization's core hours, you can choose your start time and end time as long as you're available at these times for work meetings. So it still enables the organization to create spaces for meetings and making sure people are available, but at the same time, giving people some flexibility so they can work around other things in their life that they're managing. alternative schedules. Maybe people are working evenings or longer hours or fewer days to make the work more feasible for them with everything else that they're managing. Can have 100% remote work, job sharing. So maybe there's a way to take one job and have two people do the job so that there's more flexibility in terms of scheduling, and also collaboration and learning when people are doing something together instead of having just one person doing it. You're bringing in that collaboration and different perspectives. The next one's kind of interesting. It's a results only work environment. So with this, it's the idea that the focus is not how many hours you do your job, but what are the results that you're actually getting. And so, what do we want with our workplace? Like, what's our mission? What are the results we're aiming for? Are you getting those results? Great. It doesn't really matter how many hours you're spending at work. Welcome, Janet. I see you've joined us.
My apologies. I was having a hard time getting in, but I think it was on my end. So I apologize for being late.
No worries at all. So we're just going into a deeper dive on policy, and right now we're on the flexible working arrangements, just to let you know where we are. Yeah, and then the next one as well. I hadn't really heard of this actually before I started digging into it, but it's a great one, which is unlimited vacation. And the idea with this is that employees take time when they need time. And it's, if you give this to employees, what you're doing is kind of fostering that sense of trust and self-accountability. How do I get my work done and take the time I need? Okay, I feel more fulfilled. I feel more productive. I'm going to stay in this organization, be really committed for a longer time. So these are the different types of flexible working arrangements. And please feel free, if you want to add anything or any comments, any thoughts, please feel free to jump in at any time.
I did have a question. I do have a question.
Yes, please go ahead.
Just looking at this from the perspective from our organization. So we employ peer supporters in the clinical health system. So people with lived experience who are working to, foster relationship and connection with others, people coming in for service. So say at a crisis response center or a hospital environment or a clinical environment. So they work shift work, which has to be between certain times in order for us to fulfill a contract. So, we need to have, say, 16 hours of coverage at the crisis response center. And if we allow people to choose their shifts, we would only cover probably from 9 till 5. So I'm just curious from your perspective, if you can't work from home and, I'm looking at these and we do provide for our administrative team who are on salary and who are not working hourly and not working shift work, a lot of these types of flexible working arrangements. But what is there to be done? Or is there any advice or suggestion for those positions that are more rigid? Maybe there's not, but I'm just going to ask anyway.
Yeah, that's such a great question, Julian. Thank you for bringing it forward. I'd love to open it up and see if other people have ideas or suggestions around that. Maybe it's something you've dealt with in your own organization.
That's a tough one because the role requires them to be on site for certain hours. I guess my only thought is maybe it's just an extension of what Daniela was saying in terms of the job sharing. There might be something with reduced hours. I don't know is it like 7 hours in a row or?
So, we certainly try to take into consideration when hiring somebody what their preferences are. If somebody's been with us longer, as people leave, we try to tailor those preferences, make sure they kind of get the slot that they want. They all have a manager to report to who is working actively with them. And we offer active accommodation, making sure that individuals have, adequate sick time, mental health days. To be honest, in some ways, like we've been so generous that we have an absenteeism problem. So so it's a really tight, like I just feel like it's such a hard balance. It's so hard because you want to just believe, I came into this work 5 years ago believing like everybody's just like invested. And then you realize that, oh, now we have to put policies in place that are uncomfortable because of a few people who are taking advantage. So I don't know. Maybe it's just, yeah, any, I don't know what to do to make it more flexible when actually we're trying to tighten it up a little bit. But then, like, how do we make it so people don't feel like they're being constrained or punished? Because that's not the point. Like, we want people to have a good work experience.
Yeah, and it's
I'll
so
just,
interesting. Oh, sorry, go ahead,
oh, sorry,
please.
Daniela. I don't know if this
Yeah.
will help, and probably not, but I'm just going to share what we did at the foundation. But we don't have the same situation, Julia, where we're fixed in terms of a schedule because I'd say the majority of our staff work remote. But something we have, so we have a bunch of committees. One is culture committee, and a stream of the culture committee is a wellness subcommittee. Our wellness subcommittee had suggested different initiatives throughout the year. One was like wellness appreciation days. So there was a period where everybody got to enjoy a wellness appreciation day. So for instance, we had Friday before the Canada long weekend as an appreciation day. So the office was fully closed, and it was a gift to staff to say thank you for working so hard, have a 4 day long weekend. And, it really went over well and everybody got to enjoy it. I don't know if that's realistic for your organization, but sometimes when you're able to close the office for everyone, it
Yeah,
makes a difference. The
right.
other thing we've done is we have piloted a 2 years ago, and we just renew every summer. It's never a given so that we manage expectations. But for the months of July and August, and this came from the Wellness Subcommittee, if everyone worked an extra 45 minutes a day over a fortnight schedule, so over 10 business days, you work 45 minutes for 9 of those 10 business days, and we have every other Friday off, only in the summer. And it's really just to take advantage of the beautiful weather. Everybody's in a good mood. And anyway, so I don't know if that helps, but won't help with the absenteeism problem. May or may not, but it helps on, I think, allowing everyone to participate if they're full time. Part time is a little bit different.
It's harder, but that's great. I love the idea of the wellness subcommittee. That's pretty cool. So, it's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Rita. Laura, go ahead.
Yeah, absenteeism. I know we have staff, myself and 4 others, and I feel abused to be quite honest with you. We in trying to be overly generous and aware of some issues, well, we went so far as to give every Friday off before long weekends from May 24th till Thanksgiving. So that was 5 Fridays. And rather than being a thank you perk, it's become an expectation. And, people are planning their vacations around it because they get an extra day. And if it's a long weekend, they get an extra 4 days. And, and similarly over the Christmas break when we are closed, it's, it's, it's a perk meant to be for thank you, acknowledgement, and recuperation, and it's it's lost it somewhere. And even when I do try to explain the intention, I am, you know, I could almost have guessed this morning that someone was going to call in sick for today. I'm like, why? Why is that? I work from home. And if I'm not well, I still can work from home. I'm not, obviously there are extenuating circumstances, but there's just this. I feel that if I've kind of lost some of the depth of conversation about why it's important and why people need to take advantage of it rather than, well, we just take advantage of it because we can take advantage of it, and I don't have to tell you or connect with you or ask you for help or or have you support me through something. I am none the wiser, and of course, can't ask. Well, or if I do ask, I get my head bitten off. But anyway, it's and I couldn't help but think as you were talking, the preparation, the presentation of flexible working arrangements, is it to whose benefit? Is it that for the employee's benefit, or is it for the organizational benefit? And I think for us anyway, where we are a very small group with folks who wear many hats and keep things running, that when someone does take advantage of it, it just prevents the other people from doing what they were going to do because they're not there. So it becomes very, we're in a state. Let's put it that way.
Mm. Thank you very much for sharing, Laura. And I mean, you raise an interesting point, right? You're saying, well, so who's this for? Is it for the employees or for the organization? And I guess in the ideal world, it would be for both, right? Because we see that this actually does benefit both. And then it's tricky because there may be people that are taking advantage on the one side. There may be people, like Julia's saying, with the shift work that really need more of that on the other side. And then how do you navigate that? So I don't think there's one like simple answer here. But I love, Rita, what you were suggesting, in kind of creating things where it's like very explicit that everybody's part of that and benefiting from that. So even if in other areas, maybe that's not possible because of the requirements of the job, you're kind of looking for alternative opportunities to provide that. And I don't know, Julia, just something that came to mind, I don't know if it's helpful or not, is the idea of, maybe if there's certain shift times that are fixed, but maybe there are others that are, that like could be more conducive for people. So, okay, this week, maybe it's this one, but next week, maybe you can put you on this one and have people, move around in that so it feels more fair. There might be something you're already doing, but in as much as is possible,
Yeah.
maybe that's another suggestion.
I think I like that suggestion. I think that our experience has shown us that people prefer predictability. And so, so it's so hard. Shift work is hard. It's really tough. So it's really tough. But I love these suggestions and I really appreciate your input. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. And welcome, Mark. I know you're joining a little late. Glad to have you here. We're doing a little bit of a deeper dive into policy today and just sharing a little bit about flexible work policies and the benefits and some of the challenges here we're talking about.
Cool.
So good to have you.
Thanks. Missed everybody.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna just pull up the next slide here. Just give me a second to find. Sorry, I'm just need to move this. Okay. So just there are different ways to create these arrangements, and we've been talking about that. And I think also, from what people are saying, it's like kind of an ongoing thing that you might need to reassess and adjust, not something that you just do once and then it's done. As you see, what's coming up, what's happening, what are the needs, adjusting from there. So I think it's important to see, and Julia was doing that really clearly today, like what are your employees' needs? And people may have different needs. And then what are the key factors? So, okay, we need, some roles that have shift work. So how do we address that? And what are the organization's needs? You can draft the policy and think about things like eligibility criteria. So how do you determine who's eligible for the policy? How do these processes get improved? What are any limitations that may be necessary? So just going to come back to your example, Julia, because I think it's a great concrete one to kind of unpack some of those. So, okay, we have this flexibility available, but if you're doing shift work, the degree of flexibility isn't the same, and this is why. So that's a limitation that you need to put in place because of the organization's needs in this case. You can implement a pilot policy and get some feedback before you actually implement the whole policy. This is just some ways that you could go about doing this. And here's a case study, which is Microsoft's flexible work policy. So Microsoft implemented the concept of a hybrid workspace across three dimensions, the work site, the work hours, and the work location. So the physical space where employees work, like an office, at home, or on the go, typically the jobs are either on site or they allow for up to 50% or even 100% work from home. The work days, this can be relating to the workday start and end times, whether it's full or part-time. In Microsoft's case, they leave the flexibility in work hours to the discretion of individual team managers, I guess based on what their department needs, but they encourage employees to work the hours best for them. And then the geographic location of workers, like city and country. Each organization at Microsoft has guidelines that define the degree of location flexibility that's possible. And again, it depends on the job. So some can be done at a number of locations, which in job postings will be marked as multiple locations. And then just in terms of the results that they've gotten, 92% of Microsoft's employees have said they believe the organization values flexibility and enables them to use working patterns that are best for them. And 93% are confident they can collaborate effectively as a team, regardless of where they're located. So we saw that teamwork was something that can be impacted when you're working remotely, but in this case, employees seem to feel like they can still collaborate effectively. And at the same time, workers crave meaningful connections with their coworkers, which led Microsoft to consider ways in which they can support their employees in working together rather than merely co-working when they meet. So those are the things, okay, we've been intentional in creating this flexibility. There are a lot of benefits. Now, how can we make this even better to bring in this sense of meaningful connection for people working here? So that's just an example of a case study. And yeah, I'm curious through this discussion and particularly through, what Julia raised and Laura raised and some of the challenges we're talking about. What are your biggest insights so far on creating flexible workplace policies? What's coming up through the discussion? What's come up for you? Insights or reflections, questions?
Well, I do have some comments about just the administrative side of things, not shift work, but I've noticed that it was interesting when you brought up the unlimited vacations. And again, we do try to create flexible work environments, although we haven't put it in policy, which is a good idea. We do have it in contract for individuals that are eligible for a flexible work environment. So before they're hired with our team, we can discuss and actually put that in the offer to make sure that they know that their work environment will be honored, what they need and what they've requested. But the unlimited vacation, that's interesting because I find that I work with some very high performers that would never take it. So I'm forcing people to take vacation. Like my staff are the worst at taking their vacation. And I have to watch it for them and then be like, so that's getting kind of high. I think it's time to take some vacation. So that was just an interesting kind of side. That was interesting when I'm like, I don't think I can do that because I would be like, they just wouldn't go.
That is so interesting. And isn't that interesting also to see kind of the flip side, right? So Laura, you're talking about, okay, we put in all this flexibility, people are taking advantage, but then you've got like this flip side of people who are not even taking the vacation. So it's a range. And how do you navigate it? Thank you. Yeah, anybody else? Any insights that you're having around this?
I need to take some vacation. I am so bad, and I have actually been told that, it would by a staff member, if I took vacation, it would model to them how important taking vacation time was, and I should take vacation so that they take vacations. And this is a person, like everybody, I try to get it ahead when the vacation time is to make sure, we're okay. And this one staffer will tell me 3 days ahead when she's taking time off. Makes it really difficult.
Mm.
But
Yeah, and I think
do
you,
I never say no. I mean, it's as flexible as you want to make it, but it makes it very difficult when there's only four of us to make sure that it's all fits and works and there's still deliverables happening.
yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Laura. And I think that's an important point you make too, right? Because that modeling piece is part of the learning journey we've also been on with the COP. So how do you model the things that you're wanting to see in your organization and with your staff? And I think the message around vacation is, we all need rest to be able to come back and be our most productive. So thank you. Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote it in the chat, but what Julia said just just brought back things of whenever, in the old life, everybody was always scared to take vacation. And,
Mm-hmm.
your fear of, like I wrote down, fear of being replaced or retribution in some way, the microaggressions, oh, you took time off, or that maybe that person didn't have any, or something like that. And when, you know, now hearing who were just said it a second ago, I think it was Laura, like just, I should take it, but you're secure. Like, I don't know, like it's feeling that security and comfort in coming back is I think the hard thing that, somebody that may not have necessarily say declared they've got a disability, or maybe they don't get along with everyone in the office or something like that. Like they just feel they don't want to take it. I know I never really took my holidays at all for that reason, for part of it being that reason, because I would miss something and all of a sudden it's like now I'm on the outs. I'm not the one that's ahead of things. And that's always a really, really, really tough thing to sit there and deal with. So
Wow. Thank you for sharing that, Mark.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I think those are really important considerations. And I guess it makes me think about that same idea of like modeling and being explicit about, so why do we have vacation? What's it for? Is this something that we really encourage? And we do, and everybody does. And so people don't need to feel like, oh my goodness, if I go on vacation, like I'm so far behind,
yeah,
or they're going to replace me, you know.
yeah.
So thank you. Great, great point. Yeah, thank you, everybody. So great discussion, great insights. And I want to pass it over to you, Shantaine, for the next part.
Thank you, everyone. Bear with me just a moment. I'm going to get our slide here. So that was a very, very helpful segue into when we're looking at policies and building inclusive language within the communication in the policies. So language itself is not just about the words, it influences the workplace and, dynamics, inclusion, and power structures. Much to your point, Laura, your colleagues letting you know that you would lead by example by taking vacation. The language kind of formulates the community in the same way. So using language ensures that policies, communication, and leadership reflect the diversity of the staff and the community served. Not so much or primarily on the diversity of the staff, but also how the organization runs and the values that the organization really cares for. So I'm thinking about, policies around, let me just go back, policies around accommodation and what that looks like and as somebody who would like to request accommodation, a lot of people don't want to go that route because it seems as though they will be a burden if they request something outside of what's already stated in a policy that's been communicated with them. And in some organizations, the process for requesting accommodations is really long and extremely invasive. Um, from personal experience, um, some organizations that are not within the disability sector, but some organizations like require medical documents, which I think is a bit invasive and it will deter people from feeling included and part of the team and also like reinforces that they might be a burden or don't belong. So just really being mindful about that and bringing it back to flexible working arrangements. Language around this, in my experience, is like, well, for remote, like requesting remote work, it's like, well, if you absolutely need to, but it would be best if you could come to the office because of X, Y, and Z, as opposed to initially just offering that as, if you need to, if you feel safer and more comfortable working from home, this is an opportunity or this is something that you can take advantage of, as opposed to the first example of, well, if you absolutely must work from home, then for sure we can accommodate you. But which is not a welcoming experience for someone who would also have to, I guess, fight that anxiety to request for that flexibility, even though it is offered, it's just an extra step and it wasn't included outright in the policies of how the organization runs. So the impact of exclusionary language, it can reinforce stigma. So for instance, if you are using the term so and so suffers from, which is the Western medicalized disability term, like somebody suffers from, as opposed to somebody has or a person has. Um, there are terms like describing individuals as, wheelchair bound, which is not very inclusive at all. Um, and just being mindful of terms like um, disordered or impaired, uh, that could exclude a community from, from the outset, just based on the policies on organizations and how they run. Also, in terms of professionalism, using terms like good fit, a general term that would probably be harmless at first, but good fit is a generalization and doesn't really speak to any particular valued characteristics of an individual. And so good fit means that there is a mold, and usually that mold is a Eurocentric, very white-centered mold and doesn't really include um, racialized individuals or indigenous by BIPOC people with disabilities. And so that's something to be mindful about as well. Language should be mindful of race and culture and systemic barriers. And if the language and policies and communication is not inclusive, again, it just signals for someone who may be outside of the Western Eurocentric mold, it will signal to them right away that they don't fit in or that they don't belong within an organization. Now comes the topic of we don't see color and broad language like that. So it can erase the identity of an individual and again reinforce stigma that someone is othered. I'm a Black woman, so if I enter a room, I already know that I am not like most people, or there's something different about me. So to have someone say, "We don't see color," it kind of strips away what makes part of me me. And so that's something to be mindful about as well. When saying things like, we don't consider race here, we treat everyone the same. That's great, but you do need to understand the unique things or make an effort to understand the unique things that make people them. Terms like everyone is allowed flexibility, they just have to ask for it, which involves an extra step in someone taking the initiative outside of what is inclusive and what should already be built in a policy to go forward and ask for extra things, and that they might then be seen as a burden or again not fit in. So being mindful of race and culture and diverse language. If HR policies only use the term Indigenous, but never mention specific nations, it just means that Indigenous people are a monolith. And so there are different unique lived experiences based on, where someone is from. And so Indigenous and First Nations, sometimes they don't include those who are Inuit or Métis. So if you are being specific and mean a specific group, it's important to name it and be specific about it. So accessibility in language. I know that policy writing is it's a task and it might be tedious. And a lot of the policies that I've seen in personal experience have been very cold and robotic. So it is important to use clear and plain language. And even in the nonprofit sector, we have language of our own that's not always accessible and different short forms that when I first entered the RDC, I had to ask for clarification, which was, if these things weren't plainly laid out, then, and if someone doesn't feel comfortable to ask those questions, there's going to be a lack of understanding of said policy. So just to keep that in mind as well, to try to simplify it and make it as clear as possible, because policies are large, scary documents to some. And so the clearer it is, the easier it is to understand. And accurate policy, or sorry, access to policy to adjust if accurate states that what you are given in a role or a project, if there's a more accessible and inclusive way to phrase it, that would be best. So just going back to it being clear, the policies being clear and concise, and in as plain language as possible. So in inclusive policy language, instead of saying things like must have excellent written English skills, you can break it down to try to say something to the tune of strong communication. This signifies that multilingual and non-traditional formats of communication are welcome and valuable and not, I don't want to use the word accepted, but they still have value within the organization. Really bring to light that diversity in communication is helpful. And instead of saying Canadians, to use more inclusive language like those living in Canada, that would be helpful as well. Now, bringing it to using wrong language, I think that it is important to give ourselves grace because language does shift over time. So keeping an open mind to feedback and correction, and understanding that policies do govern how organizations are run, but the concept of them not being set in stone and open to correction, and once they are, amended, bringing it to the team to say, this is what the policy stated, this is how we amended it and why, that would be helpful for everyone to understand, the change and the shift in the language. It's a learning experience not only for the policymaker, but for those within the organization that engage with the policy as well, and to normalize correcting the self. So, thank you for bringing that to our attention. I think that in a session that we had at Race and Disability Canada, there was a mention of color blindness and, I don't see color, but the term that we had used was colorblind. And someone in the session did mention that, the language around that had shifted. And so it's just like a snap decision. Thank you for bringing that to our attention. And then we followed up with, going back into the slides and even mentioning, the I don't see color as a quotation in this particular session. That was like an immediate adjustment that we made based on a suggestion that we had on a conversation. So how to stay informed with the ever-changing shift of language is to follow organizations and activists doing the work. And that's big in social media. The algorithm doesn't help much, but we do curate as best we can our own experiences on social media, whether that be LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook. So it's important to note as well that language and inclusive language is not about perfection, but it's about the intention behind it and how you react to, the shifts being brought to your attention as well. And I just wanted to, before we get into the interactive activity, I wanted to open the floor. I saw that some things were happening, possibly in the chat, so bear with me just a moment.
Yeah, I wrote some stuff in there as it was. This is
Oh,
my
yes. Okay.
as you were going along on this, I'm like microaggressions and
Yes.
it's about merit. And then the phrase is like colorblind. I heard that I mean I heard that growing up in Catholic school and stuff. I hated those terms. I really yeah. Anyways, so I was sitting there just being like, yes, but the last slide you were on, something super interesting has happened. Can you go to that slide for a sec?
Absolutely.
Bye, Julia. Because Julia has to go to another meeting.
Yes. Thank you, Julia.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Okay. I love the inclusive language is not about perfection. It's about intentionality, I think is huge. So for those of you not in BC, and I don't know who else is here besides me and Rita, what I find interesting is, and I'm going to try to, Daniela, cut me off if I'm going too far, please. So we had the RCMP. Sorry, I'm going to tell you the story now too. The RCMP out in Langley here, or not Langley, part of Surrey, they ended up killing a 15-year-old autistic boy, and his name was Chase. So I started a bit of a campaign, and I'm working with Chase's family to get some, to get far better training and awareness into law enforcement. I don't have much faith in the RCMP, but because of what our political situation is in Surrey, we've got the Surrey Police Service, which is our new force. So I've emailed them before to say, I have a garbage truck outside that's just too loud. All right. And anyways, I got an email response back from one of the people in the police office, and they talked about how they were developing training for officers with Pacific what's their faces, a Pacific Autism Friendly or Family Network, which I'm not a big fan of, anyways. But what I found interesting was that, like, how it says follow organizations and activists doing the work. One of the points I made in my original letter, and what I've asked people, just regular citizens, to email to the police, is to say, you know what, you're not sitting down with parents and finding out what it's like for us to go through and talk about these things, or what strategies and techniques that we have. And I think by this person essentially sidestepping that is like trying to sidestep that responsibility of actually going out and talking to that community and actually trying to make things better. Um, because it is a matter of time before someone else is going to be, killed again. But I just see this and I go, oh my God, what a perfect example of just exactly that in real time. And I haven't had a chance to reply to the message yet, but um, it's something where I'm going to challenge and push them to say, no, you're not going to just do the training. You got to do way more than that. Um, Anyways, yeah. So there. That's all I've got for that one.
Thank you, Mark, for sharing that. It's almost as though they should be engaging in a COP themselves.
Yeah. Huge.
And,
Hugely, Danielle. Or Chantain. Huge. Yeah.
and it's so disappointing that it takes the persistence of, activists. Essentially, it takes their persistence and their persistence only to get certain things done with regards to, dealing with large entities like the police force
Yeah.
or the RCMP or just government on a whole. Like it takes an entire coalition of
Yeah.
individuals to actually shift and move things forward.
Yeah.
I still have hope in humanity, but it is it's tough.
Yeah.
So thank you for bringing that up because it's important.
Yeah.
Did anyone else? Oh, Daniela.
Oh, I guess I'm just thinking maybe just because of the time, it would be good to move into our next activity to give people a chance to apply some of this.
Sure thing.
I think, we always feel like what's really helpful is if we can give you some concrete ways to apply the learning so that you can take that with you. And so what we're going to do is put you into two groups, two breakout groups, and give you some different policies to look at and review and revise. So the first one is this disability and accessibility support policy. Do you mind going to the next slide, Shante? Thank you. And then the next one is the language and communication standards policy. And do you mind going to the next slide?
No problem.
Oh, oops, I wonder what happened there. There's no, hmm. Would
I
would
will
you go ahead?
switch. You can switch.
Yeah, I think thanks. It's probably on my slides. I might not have added it to the online ones. And what I'm going to do is just put a link to each policy in the chat. So your group can go to the policy that you're going to be working on to find all the information there. Um, and I'm just going to pull up a second here. Okay. So what we're going to ask you to do is to review your assigned policy and identify areas where the policies may not fully accommodate the diverse needs of employees. Revise the policy to make it more inclusive. So we won't have time to actually do revisions to the policy, but just to make some notes on what are the revisions that you would like to see that better reflect inclusivity by considering different employee needs. And then offer some recommendations. Are there other ways to improve these policies to ensure they're equitable and accessible to all employees? I'm not going to have a very long time because we are limited on time. So we're going to give you about 10 minutes to do this. I'm going to put you in two groups. So just let me set those up. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to open those. So the first room one is going to be Janet and Rita and Tulsi in that room. If you can do the policy number one, so disability and accessibility support policy. And then Mark and Laura, you're going to be in room two. And if you can do the second one, language and communication standards. Any questions before we go? Okay, great. So we'll have about 10 minutes. And then if you can come back and just give us a summary of what you came up with in your group. We'll just have a couple minutes to do that. So at least we can also hear what you've been working on in short form. So let me just create here. Okay. Should see the invitation coming now. So I didn't put you in a room, Shantae, because I thought we could just kind of see. Maybe I'm going to go into the room with Laura and Mark and just kind of
Yes. Okay.
um
Um, not
and if
okay.
you want to go into the other one or
I can do that.
that
Like
yeah.
flow.
Yeah, or and then we could switch, or I mean it does I think it just probably makes sense. There are two of us just to each choose a room.
Yes.
Would you prefer to be in the one with Laura and Mark or in the other one? So they're
It doesn't. Let me see. Yeah, it doesn't matter, really.
okay. I'm happy to join that one. I just feel like there's a little bit of navigating with
Oh,
so I just
okay. No
I'm happy to
problem.
join that one. Do you want me to put you in the other one or
I think you might have to because I don't see the option to navigate through breakout rooms. Thank you.
okay, okay, perfect. See you soon. Oh, Shantaine, sorry, before you oh,
Down syndrome. So people with intellectual disability who have executive functioning issues who require very plain language.
Yeah.
So, you know, is it inclusive language? Is it plain language? Is it a series of documents that are in different types of language? Never mind translation to global languages, but just from inclusive to plain language inclusive. I think the possible combinations become almost endless. And I had asked during a COP workshop last year, it must have been, that I thought it would be a really good idea for your organization to provide a series of sample policy directives that could be customized depending on need rather than everybody reinventing the wheel
every time.
in their own sector every time,
Yep.
depending on what the use was. And we had made an attempt in our policy manual to put a plain language introduction into our policies. And the problem was it didn't quite capture the intent of the policy. And then people were finding fault with the inclusive language that we had. And it became, it was abandoned mission in the end because it becomes very complicated for us to, again, is this for staff? There's only 4 of us,
Mm.
not hundreds, not Microsoft. I understand how Microsoft could be involved with it, but or is it for people who might use our resources, or is it for our awareness campaigns? Who is it that we are gearing things to? Is it for job recruitment? Is it like I I just I just don't think it's well, I suppose it's been acknowledged that it's not cut and dried, but I don't know how in 10 minutes you could like choose one and let's come up with it. It's like depends what you're
No,
using it for.
yeah, yeah, I agree. Um, I mean, even like when I look at certain things like in this, because I see this in so many other documents as well, but like professional, how are we defining professional? How are we defining
Mm,
how are we defining clear communication? What's clear? What does clear actually mean? Um, is it done from a we were actually kind of in the middle of redoing our own society's policies as well, because what we started off with 2 or 3 years ago or what have you, is not what we're those are changing around now, and I haven't had a chance to sort of look at them, but there are questions and things that I go, this lens, like it feels like it's the wrong fit for the lens.
right.
And just prior to this just prior to this, I had another meeting with our film group, um, and we were talking about just tools in general because we're doing a film about ADHD and lived experience. And what I found interesting was, um, like we were talking about how good it would be to have tools, and I'm going, you know what? People, when they have these tools, when they have language, they're not going to use them how you intend them to be used.
Right.
You're going to interpret them their own way and use them how they feel like that they think that they're using them right, or whatever is in their best either interest themselves or their best corporate interest. And I think that is really that's another thing to kind of keep in mind. It's you go back to what the policy says, but how is it going to be misconstrued or misunderstood? I don't think that gets looked at very much because someone will determine the policy in a different way.
Daniela, you're listening, but I'm sorry, we're not doing our homework, but I just think it's too challenging. I,
Well, I think you are doing it because you're looking at it, right? And you're
mm,
thinking about all the different considerations. So all of this is really relevant, everything you're saying, and it's really good discussion. So first of all, like who are we doing this for, right? Who is it
mm,
geared for? So I think that's a great question, which something stated like this doesn't really address. And then I think your points as well, Mark, about like the meaning of professional and the meaning of clear, like what does that mean? And then also I think the other part about like interpretation, right? There's something there about how are these policies interpreted. So we
Yep.
have this on paper, but what does this actually mean?
So one of the things that I did was, and I do this for most things that I look at when I'm writing or rewriting something, is I break everything into sentences, and I will place like and I'll start to underline maybe certain key things, or I'll bold them to say, what does this actually mean? And if I look at a phrase where it's the one where it says employees are expected to communicate, that's another one. Underline, using professional language. Okay, what is professional language? In a way that aligns with the expectations of the workplace. Whose expectations? Who's defining them? Are we able to write what those expectations down in some way, shape, or form? Like it leaves us open to interpretation, open to whatever the culture is. If you've got some, quote unquote, bad apples in there, who are the ones that are going to be taking advantage of this? And again, that comes down to misusing policy, misusing tools, to someone else's detriment. So it's that piece of it, the written and spoken communications. Is there a better way to say that? I mean, language standards, I don't think most organizations have a language standard. I don't know. But like even just back to the professional language side of things, does that mean that I don't know, if you work for a skateboarding company versus if you work for a health authority, the fact that in the skateboarding world, they may not care about dropping the F-bomb every so often, but in the healthcare authority, you do? Like, like there's it's this sort of not snobbery. my
yeah, yeah.
my British side comes out. There's that, but like it's it's not as clear. It's this, it's again that it harks back to that old um hierarchical white power-ish sort of keep power centralized, ambiguous. It keeps it there. Um, and it's funny because random side topic, Mackenzie's listening to this and she's like, I said, well, you want to go get your iPad? And she's like, no, this is interesting, Daddy. So
I love the questions though that you're asking, Mark, right? Like this is the purpose of this activity. It's kind of to look at it and like what are the questions that are coming up?
yeah,
So the questions about interpretation, the questions about clarity, ambiguity, vagueness, all those things.
yeah.
And kind of a recognition of how often that's what we see in the policies, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I have no doubt that and it was an exercise that we had done, looking at recruitment, at job postings, and language that could be changed to make it be more inclusive. And they were simple things, simple bullets that just, you know,
Okay, so just want to be fully acknowledging that that was not a huge amount of time to do this activity. So we weren't expecting you to perform miracles in 10 minutes, but just to be able to start looking and thinking critically about this and sharing some ideas and reflections. And so curious if each group could share with the other group, just a very brief summary of what it is that you thought about or talked about in your group. So if anyone would like to jump in. So now we had Mark and Laura, and we had Tulsi, Janet, and Rita.
we're not jumping at the bit here. Mark, sorry, Mark, I'm just gonna
Go for it.
yabber. I guess I just sort of wanted to bring it to attention how challenging this was, the exercise, because there are so many different ways that policy or language can be used, and particularly in our sector where we are, at any time when we do communicate directly with people with Down syndrome, it has to be in plain language and super plain language. And what does plain language look like that is inclusive? Well, that's a very interesting question, isn't it? Where for example, there globally, there are some languages that don't even have a word for Down syndrome. So how would you write anything to individuals who spoke that language when they don't even have a word for what it is you're talking about? That's the extreme. Like that's an extreme example. But I recall during our work together that we were looking at recruitment job posting. So we're talking about, for us, people who have the skill set where they're applying to jobs where they do not have Down syndrome. But by simple changes to the language or the addition of a sentence or a bullet could totally change and make the document way more inclusive and including, and still plain, in involving prospective employees for recruitment. Where on the delivery end of things, in my sector, that's a big challenge. The exercise is very challenging.
Thank you, Laura.
Mark, did I miss something?
No, you didn't. And it's really funny because I'm writing you a message actually is kind of really similar to this. Because like even when I think about I'm gonna hit send it and I'm gonna send it to you anyways. but even thinking about the language in terms of identity first and person first language, right? When you have, someone who is autistic or someone who's on the spectrum, as opposed to someone with autism, which I can't stand personally myself, even with ADHD, it's the same thing. I prefer I have an ADHD brain, or I might say ADHD or something like that. With Down syndrome, I don't know where that lies. And, like I see it all over the place of whether it's Tamara Taggart or whoever, it's, diagnosed with Down syndrome as a person first model for language, but what's the identity first version of it? And does that get discussed? Because this is something that's genetic. I can't change the fact that, no, none of us can change that genetic component. So that's the other piece of it as well, is it's the perspective of the language. And I think it's important because like Shantaine was saying earlier, I can't I would never take away from the fact that Shantaine's black. I think it's the thing that makes her probably one of the makes her who she is. It's part of what defines her experience as a person and being I didn't know if you identified like cis woman as well, but like as a black woman, like that's one of your identifying things. That is what shapes your view of the world, right? Rita is no different. Daniela's no different. We're all no different in that way. And those are things that we shouldn't be hiding. We should be bloody well acknowledging them, because that's what makes this world beautiful to begin with. Anyways, yeah, the language is hard. It's like when Lauren and I started talking, I just started breaking down all the sentences, and I'm like, what are all these things? Like, what does professional mean? What does clear mean? What does the communication piece mean? Why does it have to be written and spoken? What does it mean when it says in a way that aligns with the expectations of the workplace? Well, who's writing those expectations? Have you got a bunch of jerk managers in there that are doing this stuff? Who knows? Um, it's really picking out those words in what goes back to that old white power hierarchical structure of consolidation, all in the ivory tower thing. So, anyways, yeah.
Thank you, Mark. That's great. Really, really appreciate everything that you shared there. What about the other group, Rita, Janet, Tulsi? Can just share a really brief summary of what you discussed.
I can jump in here if that's okay with the group, and feel free to jump in as well. So really high level, just reviewing the policy. We felt that it could probably be rewritten a little bit more welcoming. It's quite cut and dried, and it's very business oriented. So it could be something like this. I'm just going to make it up, but our workplace is inclusive, and we strive to ensure that our staff have whatever they need to perform at their optimal best, or something like that. I'm just making that up, but basically it's like a mutual and shared responsibility on a reasonable accommodation, so working together, whereas it really comes down as the employer just telling the employee what's required. Broadening accommodation, because right now it's limited to just disability or health related conditions, and there's much more to that. So suggested just taking out due to disability or health related conditions. Some of the wording is a bit negative, like considered, I can't remember the rest of that, but verification, like medical verification, we would never ask for medical verification. There might be instances where uh, a physician's recommendations might be needed depending on what the situation is. Basically, situation specific. And then there was another comment on the front end, perhaps in the onboarding process, and maybe this is written in the guidelines, where the employee doesn't have to say, I need an accommodation, but it's the manager saying, sharing we have this policy, I invite you to talk to me or HR if you need some assistance. So doing that right at the front end to make it, a more welcoming, inclusive environment from the get-go, and not putting the onus all on an employee where there's like, a power imbalance or something like that. Anyway, there was probably a lot more, but that's all I could remember. So I toss it to the group.
That's great. Thank you so much, Rita. Yeah, and I love the part about like the proactive part before even the policy itself, right? How you actually inform the employee about the policy in a way that makes them feel that it's, this is something being done to include and welcome them. So, and, bringing them in proactively in that way. So I think that's really great. So we're almost at the end of our time together. I just want to ask you if you could very briefly fill out a very quick poll that I'm going to launch just about your experience with us today. So let me just launch it here. Should take about a minute or so. Very, very brief. Let's give you a minute there. Then, yeah, I'd love to just close out with a really brief takeaway from everyone as we end today. Um, and I'll just call you as I see you on the screen. So maybe Janet, if we could start with you, what's your takeaway from today?
I guess my takeaway, one of the things I was thinking about is that we really need to do a review of our policies that we reviewed probably 4 or 5 years ago to reflect the language of the day because we're learning all as we go along. We're always, someone will educate us by saying that's not how I want to be referred to or whatever. So I think that there's that routine sort of checking for some of those things, specifically around the language. But I also have a takeaway is a big task to really sort of think about those different types of like the what it means if you're working flex time or 100% remote time, and how does that fit into things like the alternative schedules like that's is we don't have an alternative schedule. We let people work flex time, but some of it can be remote, but not all of it. So I've got a lot of work to do. That's what I'm taking away.
Thank you, Jen. I really appreciate that and all the thoughtfulness and reflection that you're doing, right? Because it is a big task and it's an ongoing task, and there's so many different layers to it. So thank you for that. Yeah, what about Rita? What are you taking away from today?
Thanks, Daniela. Very similar to Janet, just trying to take a look at our policies. And sometimes you think it's a small policy and you realize. So I'll use, for example, looking at the definition of family. And we're like, okay, so we talked about chosen family, have a really nice two-sentence to broaden the definition of family. And I actually did run it by legal because I was curious. And of course, there's the legal side, and then there's what we want to do as an employer. And so I only share that in terms of we'll be going beyond, of course, legal, but when you talk to a lawyer, they're very specific about what's required as, say, employment standards, which they have very specific definition of family. And so if you have a family responsibility leave, for instance, if you broaden a family definition and family responsibility, it can affect the legal side. Anywho, but yes, in terms of policies in general, the, it's good work and required work, but it's very thoughtful work to be inclusive. And sometimes, and this is what I found in accessibility, what is inclusive for someone actually may not be inclusive for someone else, or what's accessible for one person may affect the accessibility for someone else. So perhaps as a closing statement, the one size doesn't fit all in that case.
And that's, yeah, I think that's such a critical piece, Rita, because we can draft policies, right, that apply to everyone. But I think that the idea of this is to be able to have, room to be flexible within those policies, and how this policy is applied for someone might not be how it's applied for someone else, to actually make sure that the policy is doing what we want it to do, which is to be inclusive
Mhm.
towards people. So that's, yeah, such an important point. Thank you. Laura, what about you? What's your takeaway for today?
Oh, I appreciate the planning and the content and the time constraint, and that perhaps um, it's a bit of a challenge sometimes when it's like, okay, we're going to move on to the next thing now, and rather than working it through. Now, this is a little bit bigger group than what I was used to. It's usually just myself and one other person with a facilitator. So in terms of takeaway, I wanted to hear more, but I didn't have an opportunity to even, sort of get my own head around it. As I had acknowledged around the time when we talked about inclusive language during the first phase, some of the challenges that we have in the huge variety of our audiences, and adding the dilemma of plain language to with where does that intersect with the inclusive language, with cultural appropriation. Lots of work to be done still.
Yeah. Thank you, Laura, and thank you for your feedback. I mean, I think we generally try to pack a lot into these sessions, and I think like that feedback is just kind of a reminder of maybe, putting less content and having more room to engage with us. So thank you for that. We appreciate it. Mark, last but not least, what is your takeaway from today?
All of it. But no, seriously, like thinking about the policies that we're kind of redoing, it's what's the word? It makes me want to. I can't remember who it was that just said it a minute ago. But looking also not just at the words, but kind of zooming out and saying overall, I think it was you, Rita, like overall what it means when you're like, what does this sentence actually mean, kind of thing. And I think that's a piece where I'm going, making sure I look at that and I understand of maybe certain words imply certain things, but what does the sentence overall really imply? And do those words need to exist? The idea as well of, there's not one size that fits all is 1,000% true. There isn't one size that fits all. I think that's what was sort of the old way of doing things. There needs to be sort of different standards, but some sort of commonality that ties them together. And that commonality may very well just be the work that needs to be done. How do we define those tasks that need to be done? That may be where that ends up coming from. The other aspect too is some company owners are not going to care about certain aspects of it. Again, back to the one size fits all piece. Some company owners are going to care about it. Some governments are going to care. So how you find that balance, I think is kind of the question. But
Thank you.
yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, like we saw today, there are lots of different layers to this, right? And lots of different complexities. And I think the first part starts with kind of looking at things with a critical lens and starting to ask the questions. And that's a really key piece of it.
Yeah.
And it's a journey, right? We don't find all the answers, definitely not in an hour and a half. We won't find them, but we can start on that journey or continue on that journey of asking the questions, and starting to look at our policies and figure out, okay, how are we going to go forward with making these even more inclusive? So thank you so much, everybody, for being here today with us. Really appreciate your time. Our next session will be in 2 months, so May 29th, the same time, and we're going to be focusing on organizational culture. You should all have calendar invites, so if you can just RSVP to us so we know you're coming, that would be great. And thank you again, and hope to see you in May again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thank
everyone.
Bye.
you.
Great seeing
Bye
you all
now.
again.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.